Hello guys, in this video tutorial I will discuss in detail about the requirements engineering. In our last videos we discussed about the process model and all the process models in quite detail. Now the first phase of SDLC, software development life cycle, begins from the requirement engineering. So after selecting a particular process model, we start with the requirement engineering process. So based on different process model, or we can say that after selecting a particular process model, we then conduct a requirement engineering process accordingly. So the total topics covered in requirement engineering lecture is functional and non-functional requirements in detail, requirement engineering process, requirement illustration, requirement specification, requirements validation, and change management. In this video tutorial today's I will discuss in detail about the first topic, functional and non-functional requirements. Now first define the requirement engineering, the process of establishing the services that customer requires from the system and the constraints under which it operates and is developed. The system requirements are the description of the system services and constraints that are generated during the requirement engineering process. In simple words, we can say that requirement engineering is the systematic and disciplined way of collecting user requirements and then implemented that user requirements. So collection of user requirement is not easy, and we can say the collection process is quite critical, because the later problems, if traced back to this phase of requirement engineering, then fixing error become very much costly. So requirements collection, then analysis, specification, and then validation of the requirements, and then finally the software requirement specification document are all the different phases involved in the requirement engineering. So now first define the term what is requirement. It may range from high level abstract statement of service or of a system constraint to a detailed mathematical functional specification. This means the high level business goals are also the requirements, and the low level detailed functionalities, services, and all associated constraints are also requirements. In short, we can say that a requirement is a prerequisite of any software system, or we can say that any request from the user that laterally become the feature or core functional requirement is a requirement. So we will laterally discuss about different types of requirements. Not all the requirements are same, but we will categorize different types of requirements, and every category is associated with another category. Now we have two major categories: user requirements and system requirements. User requirements are statements in natural language, or we can say user requirements are the scenarios that either come from the customers, or we can say that are for the users and users. So these are the scenarios or statements for the services of the system that provides and its operational constraints. System requirements a structured document setting out detailed description of the system functions, services, operational constraints, or we can say the requirements of the system. The requirements, the detailed functionalities, requirements, services, operational environment and constraints comprise the system requirements. System requirement defines what should be implemented, so maybe the part of contract between client and contractor. We can also say that for each user requirements there are many system requirements, or we can also say that for achieving the user requirement we must have to fulfill, or we must have to implement the system requirements so that end user requirements are met. The user requirements are actually the high level requirements, or the high level user requirements or features, and for that features we need system requirements. That is one example. The first is the user requirement definition. You can see here, for example, a user requirement of the Medicare system shall generate monthly management reports showing the cost of drugs prescribed by each clinic during that month. That is the user requirement, or that is the feature. Now the detailed core functionalities or systems requirements are given here. So for example, one system requirement is on the last working day of each month a summary of drug prescribed, their cost and prescribed clinic shall be generated. Another system requirement could be the system shall generate the report for printing after 5:30 p.m. on the last working day of month. So there can be a lot of possible system requirements. One thing you should also remember that the hardware requirements, the operating system requirements, the network requirements, technology, important thing is technology requirements are all the system requirements, because that technology and that hardware infrastructure and that operating system alternately assure all the prerequisites and all the user requirements. So readers of different types of requirement specification. So the readers of user requirements are normally the client managers, or we can say the customers. System end users means those who use the system. Client engineers, contractors, vendors, system architect, etc. And the system requirements readers are the system end user, because the system end user come in both. Why? Because high level features cannot be implemented without the detailed system requirements. So system and end users alternately depend, or we can say that use the system requirements. And one more thing you should remember, that software developers deal with the system requirements. Through these system requirements, software developers implement the high level user features. Now, who are the stakeholders? We normally listen the word stakeholder. So any person or organization who is affected by the system in some way, and so who has the legitimate interest. Stakeholder types: end users are stakeholders, system managers, system owners, external stakeholders. So in short we can say that anyone who is affected from the software, or who either affect the software, is a stakeholder. So stakeholder in Medicare system are patients, doctors, nurses, medical representatives, IT staff, medical ethics manager, healthcare managers, medical record staff. All these are the different stakeholders involved in this example. Now come to the functional and non-functional requirements. So functional and non-functional requirements are basically the system requirements. So we can also say that system requirements are further divided into two subcategories. One category is functional requirement and another is non-functional requirements. So functional requirements are statement of the services the system should provide, how the system should react to particular inputs, and how the system should behave in particular situation. Or we can say that functional requirements are those requirements that must be met or that must be implemented. Or we can also say these are the detailed units of the particular user requirements. Non-functional requirements are the constraints on the services or functions offered by the system, such as timing constraints, constraints on the development process. Non-functional requirements, on the other hand, are the constraints on the services or function offered by the system, such as timing constraints, constraints on development process, standards, etc. Often applied to the system as a whole rather than individual features or services. And another category is domain requirements. These are the constraints on a system from the domain of operation, means how it will be operated, which devices are required, which things are necessary, etc. So all these are system requirements. Domain requirements contain the hardware, infrastructure, the network devices, the technology. So all these comes in the domain requirements. Non-functional requirements are the constraints which are imposed alternately on the features or the functional requirements, and functional requirements are the detailed services or functionalities. Functional requirement describe the functionality or system services. Depend on the type of software, expected users, and the type of system where the software is used. Functional user requirements may be high-level statements of what the system should do. This means functional requirements that are achieved on the high level, or we can say the high-level statements that are for the user are basically the functional user requirements or simple user requirements. So as I stated earlier, that user requirements are indirectly the functional requirements, but as a whole, when all the detailed functionalities are implemented, that comprise a single user requirement. Functional system requirement should describe the system services in detail. So these two categories become functional user requirement and functional system requirements. So both are the functional requirements. User requirements are also functional and system requirements are also functional. But normally when we say functional requirement, that actually means functional system requirements, and we call directly functional user requirement as a user requirements. Let's take the example of main care system. The functional requirements are: a user shall be able to search the appointment list for all the clinics. The system shall generate each day for each clinic a list of patients who are expected to attend appointments that day. Each staff member using the system shall be uniquely identified by his or her 8-digit employee number. This means user authentication, user registration, appointment system, approval, etc. And then laterally payment section. All are the functional requirements. Requirement imprecision. Problem arises when the functional requirements are not precisely stated. This means that functional requirements should be written well, and one of the example is precisely written. ambiguous requirement may be interpreted in different ways by developers. So this means there should not be ambiguity in writing. If we write ambiguous requirements literally that make the users or developers confused, so this means wrong system can be developed. Consider the term search in the requirement 1. User intention: search for the patient name across all appointment in all clinics. Developer interpretation: search for a patient name in an individual clinic. User chooses clinic, then search. So this means using the ambiguous terms that become that sound different for. Now the requirements completeness and consistency. In principle, requirements should be both complete and consistent. This means complete list of requirements should be collected for the system. The requirements should include the description of all the services, facilities, functionalities required by the system. While there should be no conflicts or contradictions in the description of the system. This means this means all the requirement should be arranged inconsistent with other requirements. And laterally in the requirement engineering course, I will discuss in detail about the importance of traceability matrix. This means the link should be established among all the requirements, and the requirements should be arranged in such a way that they look more consistent. So the terminology we use should be consistent. In practice, because of the system environmental complexity, it is impossible to produce a complete and consistent requirements document. But this does not mean that we will not make sure our efforts. We will put our efforts as much as possible, and we will apply all the analysis models and then verification and validation techniques, so that we produce a comprehensive, complete, consistent and unambiguous document. Non-functional requirements define the system properties and constraints. For example, reliability. This means reliability is basically related to time spent by some system, or we can say that how much user can rely on the system for a particular amount of time. So reliability. Response time means efficiency and the performance of the system come in the response time. If the response time is more, so this means there is a reduce in the performance. And the storage requirements. So response time and storage both comes in the category efficiency. Other requirement like usability, portability, interoperability, etc. are all non-functional requirements. Constraints can be input-output device capability, system representations, etc. Non-functional requirements may be more critical than functional requirements. If these are not met, the system may be useless. In short, we can say that non-functional requirements are those requirements that can be not directly demanded, or we can say that are not directly demanded by the customers, but these are the supported requirements that must be implemented in order to better achieve the functional requirements. So this means non-functional requirements help the functional requirements for better implementation. Now this is the hierarchy of the non-functional requirements in detail. Basically, we have three categories of non-functional requirements. One is the product perspective, non-functional requirements, organizational perspective, non-functional requirement, and external requirements. Product perspective, non-functional requirements include security requirements, means the system should be secure from external threat and their safety should be assured. Dependability requirements, this means on which things this system depend, this product depend. Efficiency requirements include space, storage requirements, performance requirements, and usability requirements. Requirements such as reliability, interoperability, portability, etc. also comes in product non-functional requirement category. Organizational non-functional requirements include environmental requirements, means the operational environment of the system, or we can say operational requirements and environmental requirements both are the organizational requirements. And development requirements such as the development tools required, the database, front end, coding platform, etc. all organizational requirements. And external requirements are requirements such as regulatory requirements, ethical requirements, and requirements such as legislative requirements, which further include safety requirements and accounting requirements. Non-functional requirements may affect the overall architecture of the system rather than the individual components. In short, we can say that non-functional requirements can be achieved only with the architecture and the design of the system. Laterally in the design and architecture course, I will discuss in detail about how the design of the code can help to achieve the non-functional requirements. A single non-functional requirement such as security requirement may generate a number of related functional requirements that define system services that are required. It may also generate requirements that restrict existing requirements. So these are the requirements given in the previous diagram. Product requirements, requirement which specify that the delivered product must behave in a particular way, for example execution speed, reliability, etc. Organizational requirements, requirement which are a consequence of organizational policies and procedures. It also include requirements such as process standards used or applied. Implementation requirements. External requirements are those requirements which arise from factors which are external to the system and its development process, for example interoperability requirement, legislative requirements, etc. Example of non-functional requirement in the Medicare system. Product requirement include requirements such as the Medicare system shall be available to all clinics during normal working hours. This means availability should be assured. Downtime within normal working hours shall not exceed 5 seconds in any working day. Organizational requirement include user of the Medicare system shall authenticate themselves using their health authority identity card. And external requirement include the system shall implement patient privacy provisions as set out in the this number. Matrix for specifying non-functional requirements, or we can say the units. So speed can be measured per second, size in bytes, ease of use or usability in training time, number of help frames, reliability, mean time to failure, or this means if mean time to failure is small, this means system is less reliable. Availability, etc. all comes in the reliability. This means if system is more reliable, so it will assure more availability. robustness, time to restart after failure. If the system downs or fail, this means how much it is robust to resume again. Percentage of events causing failure, probability of data corruption on failure. And portability include the percentage of target dependent statements, number of target system. So this was all about the functional and non-functional requirements. In next lecture I will discuss in detail about the requirement engineering process. Thank you so much for listening the